one of the things we're going to do today, right after the break, even though not everyone who's normally here is here today, we're going to just let everybody just introduce themselves a little bit, so you know who some of the other people are. So we have not done that, but I think this will be a good day to do that, and so at least give you some chance to know who else is here. Another thing, just before we get going in terms of the details, do you have any questions about what you read for today or anything else? And don't ask me why the sky is blue, but yes.
Yeah, where did it begin?
Off of the, up to November. Numbers 8, verse 5. I know it's half.
A man for burning?
No, 7, verse 7. To purify them, do this, sprinkle the water of cleansing on them. And what I thought at the
This is
time.
from chapter 19, verse 7, you mean? Is it?
Chapter 8.
8, verse 7.
Verse 7,
Oh.
sorry.
Okay.
To purify them, do this. And sprinkle water. Is that the foundation of the holy water in the Catholic Church?
I'm not sure.
It just struck me all of a sudden.
I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But I'll see if I can watch for that as I go through things.
Yeah, just curious.
Yes,
I think I asked you this before, but I can't remember what you said.
okay.
But you know, every time there was a sacrifice by fire, it would always say, and the aroma was pleasing to God. So what does that mean? Was it the literally the aroma coming from the meat, or was it the fact that it was their obedience to what he said that was pleasing to him?
I think that would be the aroma that would be pleasing to God would be like we would enjoy smelling a steak on the grill.
Oh, it was that. You think that's
Yeah.
what it was, huh?
Yeah. There are many, many stories in lots of ancient Near Eastern literature about people where the aroma and the fragrance, number one, would be pleasing. Number two, would be attracting. So I have a neighbor a couple doors over. If he puts a steak on the grill, it is always a good excuse for me to say, do you need any help with eating that food? And it's sort of like if in a dorm somebody makes popcorn. Everybody else starts thinking, oh, I think I want some popcorn too. Or, you smell coffee and, oh, that sounds like I'd like to have some. So but I think that's what it is. We can get, with every single one of these things, we can guess at a whole lot of stuff. And try to say, okay, is this pleasing? Is this what God wants? We don't always know, but sometimes from other literature as well, we just get that idea. Now, I've mentioned this a couple of times, but one of the things that's very hard for us to do is to recognize we have to use human words and human emotions and human descriptions to talk about things that are way beyond that. So to really talk about God in his essence is beyond what any of us have experienced. So God moves us to use words like Father and Son and Holy Spirit that we might know what wind is, and a holy wind that would blow over us, or a father and son relationship, or a parent and child relationship. And so those are simply words that are used to try to get at concepts deeper than what we know. So when we talk about redemption or reconciliation or justification or forgiveness as various ways to talk about our relationship with God, it's the best we've got. We want to make sure that we listen to the word as it's being used and to try to see the context. What I did last week with anger and wrath, it's not enough just to say, well, I know what that means, but to say, where in the story does this come? How does this unfold within the narrative, and let that help to describe it as well. But we also want to make sure that we don't simply make God out to be a bigger human being, and that we make God with all our faults and foibles, and assume that when it says he was sorry, that means exactly what we mean when we say we're sorry. It's a word that's used in human contexts. It's the best we can do is to say that gives us a hint at what else is going on. Are there any other questions that have come up? I had a request here to talk about Balaam, so we will get to that. But
You know what, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
What's hard with that is, I think God welcomes, I mean, He knows our humanity, and He knows that we relate to Him in all that emotional way. At least I do, not cerebrally and not. So when we are so much connected to Him that way, it's kind of hard to then step back and we receive it, I think.
I'm not saying God is not connected to us that way, okay?
Two-way?
I'm
Two-way connection?
sure it's a two-way communication. God is connected to us and we are connected to God. But very often we will have to use words that we use in certain contexts. We want to make sure we don't impose upon God that same thing. And I wanted to do that thing with angry. Because for us, angry is you go storming around the house because something happened and you're going to get somebody for it. And so we know a context when we use a word. When someone is angry, you might think of Ron Gardenhire arguing with an umpire. All right, he gets thrown out, or he has gotten thrown out more than a lot of other managers because he gets very agitated, and then they throw him out, and then he gets agitated more. But I don't want to make Ron Gardenhire's way of saying, I think he was safe and you think he was out, and I don't think you're being fair about this. I don't want to impose upon God that same thing. But yet, when the Bible talks about God's actions, it's often going to use those kinds of relational things. And I want to make sure that we don't, quote, misinterpret God or misrepresent God in such a way that people are going to say, well, I wouldn't want to believe in a God like that. So someone says, well, I don't believe in a God who causes suffering.
Well, I was just thinking when you honor Him and respect Him, and you want to relate to Him in that positive relationship, that's elevated. That the fact that He gives us, He wants us to relate to Him.
Yeah,
that way.
and my only point would be that there are times when we have to recognize our limitations in that. That, I might praise and honor the Lord for what He has done. That may have nothing to do with what depth of praise really could be going on. It might be just, thanks, and much more is going on there. And so there's a very personal relationship that the Bible talks about. God walks in the garden in the cool of the day to talk with Adam and Eve. And so that's certainly very different from some remote God who cannot be approached and who's 40 steps up with a sword coming out of his mouth or something like that. But what I want us to think about is there are limitations to our language to get at the whole nature of what's going on. And so sometimes we have to realize we're only going to approximate and know a little bit about that. And one of the hard things that is in all this material is the whole thing about God's holiness, and God is in the Holy of Holies. And the people were terrified. And so we might want to kind of get by that quickly. Let's hurry up and get by that stuff, because we want a God who walks with us and He talks with us and He tells us that we are His own. But we don't want a God who maybe says, you do this and you're lost forever. And you're dead, you're outside the camp. So both of those are true. God is also one who is going to say there is a place that we have within His creation, and He is not going to tolerate us trying to take His place. You shall have no other gods. And so to look at what that means here too, not to be afraid, but to recognize we're not dealing with just somebody who happens to be walking down the street next to us. Any other questions before we get going in this?
I'm still struggling with the reasons for sacrifices.
So am
What
I.
the real purpose is.
So am I.
Yeah.
I think, sacrifices come in more than one level. Like, there's a section in here where there are 12 lambs or 11 or 12 rams or 11 rams or 12 oxen or 11 oxen down to 7 or 8 or something like that. Lots of animals die, and some of them are whole burnt offerings. Part of that, I think, and this is my guess, I don't live in that world, and I want to talk about that a little bit today too. Part of it, I think, is to recognize that life is a gift, and that there are many ways in which people take it as a right and act as if there is no God around and we just do our own thing. And so this idea about something that is alive losing its life, and that could be us, and that when we're in the presence of God, the nature of life is involved there. It's got to be wrapped up in there somehow, but we live in such a different world that the one thing I want to make sure of is that I don't use it to try to get on God's good side. It's acknowledging God is there, and I have stepped over the boundary to act as if I'm in charge, and he says, this is a way to draw back and pull back and say, I really don't want to be in charge of this universe or this world or this church. And on the other hand, to recognize with thanksgiving offerings that he is the one who gives that life and gives that nourishment, and that we are here because we are his. So in some ways it's kind of a stewardship thing, but I probably err on the side of trying to make sense of something sometimes when other people would say, why bother? I preached on Genesis 22 in Germany once, on the offering of Isaac, and then his life being spared. And even though I tied it to Jesus dying and rising, the people who met on the Monday evening afterwards, when we talked about it, they had a get-together where you talk about the pastor's sermon the next day, and a kind of a little study on it. And there were several people there who said, there is no justification for ever preaching that text. It doesn't belong in the church. It doesn't belong in the pulpit, no matter what. Now, well, you know, there are people, we're going to look at some of this with the Midianites. There are people who say, that if that's who God is, I don't want to be part of him. Go kill those people. Go destroy them. Go wipe them out.
Could I ask you, the first time we hear about sacrifices with Cain and Abel, and I'd like to know how that connects with the sacrifices we're talking about.
We don't know how that connects. I believe the sacrifices of Cain and Abel are probably something where they brought from what they had been privileged to earn or acquire. So more of a thanksgiving offering than an offering for sin.
Just recently, I heard someone say, I thought, I was trying to figure out in my mind for a long time, you know, so how does this relate to God accept Abel's gift because it was a blood sacrifice?
Well, that's the guess. The guess is that it was a blood sacrifice, but that's maybe us making that up because there's so much about blood and bloodshed and holiness later. That may not be the point at all.
And they were saying, I always connected it to God, and they were thinking that it was, now that they found themselves separated from God, and they didn't think it was something that God commanded them to do, but they felt they should do out of guilt and felt they had to do something.
They didn't find themselves separated from God. Cain and Abel were born already in that broken relationship.
Well, I mean, the family, they were a family, and
yeah,
they were told.
The point that I would like to make is the text says nothing except that Cain's heart was not right with God about something. If I were to make a comparison for today, I would say, if you are giving your offering only because you feel that God will give you trouble if you don't give it. Leave your money home. don't think that somehow your relationship with God is filled with requirements to be carried out. See it as a thank offering or don't give it. And so, just very briefly, because I want to get in the
I'll try
text.
to. So, when I'm trying to figure this out, Cain was spared, and he was also pushed out.
Uh-huh.
But I think that was a big impression on him, and then maybe he's the one that put really, from his point of view in that blood sacrifice, I think that might have got into the culture that
But
he
you
came
see,
about.
that's a big guess.
It is.
That's
But-
you
but-
trying to tie the pieces together
Yeah.
when we have no connection anywhere else that said Cain is the one who taught people how to sacrifice blood sacrifices.
But
So-
the thing is, so often God reaches into the culture and uses the culture around,
Yeah,
like
but-
the Israel's.
But when
so
you say
maybe that's
so
what-
often, or you say maybe, I don't want to necessarily make those connections. I don't know what all of it's about, but I'm very hesitant to try to guess my way into something. And I think I'm probably just as puzzled about how much there is for all of these sacrifices that are there. But God uses them too here, and I don't know why. I would think that it's wrong for any animal to be killed just because of some person. That bothers me.
The reason it's important to me is, as I found out, that so many of the things that the Israelites do, when you find out later that the people around them, the pagans, were doing that too, and maybe even before them.
Well,
And so I think, that, I have a problem with that. And then if I go back and see that God does use that, the culture, to bring it into.
but there are a lot of times when, like the whole reason that all these people are to be killed, removed, destroyed, is because God says, I don't want you getting caught up in their practices. So sometimes there will be a similar practice, but a very different meaning behind it. So I might find in some culture where somebody makes the sign of a cross. To them it may be an X. And so I might say, oh, look at that. They understood, just like we do, when there's a whole different meaning behind it. I just want to be very careful that as we're going through, that we try to look at what the texts say and really try to get at the relationship with God thereby, rather than imposing or guessing. And there always has to be some guessing, but to say, that God uses the cultures roundabout goes against everything here, which says, I want you to get rid of those gods. I want you to get rid of those people because they have been sinning against me and I've had enough of it. Instead, Israel's going to go in and they're going to fall in love with them and be drawn away to worshiping false gods and making treaties with other nations and hurting their fellow citizens and finally lose the whole thing. I mean, this story that we're in right now that goes back to Genesis 12 crashes in 2 Kings 25 when the last of them are hauled away into exile. This is not a happy story. It is a story of God's love and presence and the people turning away and rebelling. And to me, that is a warning that says I too can turn away and rebel. But at least from the reading that I have done, I get a little nervous about trying to make too many quick connections, I know God can use all that stuff, but sometimes he says stay away from it. So anyway, we're going to see some more of it come along the way, and I'll try and make some further observations with you then. I want to go back just long enough to remember that beginning in chapter 11 through chapter 21, we have what is called those murmuring traditions. And just to kind of repeat those, first of all, the people complain, and then the fire of God comes. What's the fire of God?
Wrath.
Probably lightning. Okay? They get a lightning storm. That's not real happy when you're in a flat ground. Then the people want meat. It says the rabble craves meat, and then they get the manna. We've already heard about that way back in Exodus. And so some of these same stories we hear both in Exodus 16, 17, 18, as we hear here again. And, is it the same stuff happening twice? We would see this as very far away in the story. But remember, from Exodus 19, where they come to Mount Sinai, it's really only in terms of some months before they are going to leave here now in Numbers 10. So from Exodus 19 to Numbers 10 is less than a year. How about the rest of Numbers? How long does that take? Well, at first, when they send the spies up, that would be just relatively shortly, a month or 2 months or whatever it would be. They're up there 40 days. But then we're going to have, with some random things put in here, we're going to have almost 38 years. At least we assume that, because it's the time for all of the adult males to die out. So we've got this kind of all of a sudden, the rest of Numbers, we're going to have movement where they're going to be traveling. They're going to be going from one place to another, and we get a listing of all those places. We're going to get a whole thing about the dilemma with the holiness and how they live or don't live with that, and how all of that is carried out. We're going to have some of these murmurings, which kind of are clumped into 11 to 21. So it's almost as if you have some themes that are gathered together, and then some things that a lot of people see as just quite random that we're going to look at here. But we're going to end up in chapter 36 looking over the Jordan River into the Promised Land. And then all of Deuteronomy is a speech of Moses to the next generation. So we have a generation that cries out in their bondage. Moses is born. When he's 40, some of them have died by now. He leads, he kills an Egyptian guy, and he has to flee. He comes back when he's 80. Another generation, a lot of them would have died. Then he goes out with another group out into the wilderness. They complain about the fact that the walls are too thick and that they can't take the land, and a lot of them die. So in essence, the ones who are going to go into the land are the fourth generation, we can guess, and maybe even more than that, from when the people first said, we're being oppressed. And all the way through, they find fault with God that he's not giving them as much as they think they should have. They want more yet from him. We want more of this, more of that. We wish we were back there. And so we're going to get to complaining about all the people. We're going to get to complaining about those who don't like the religious leaders. We're going to get complaining within Moses' own family. And complaints about the things, the sustenance of life and things like that. And God will give them some indications of the fact that he's there, and then they don't buy it. Well, that's not good enough. Give me something more than that. Remember back, Moses has the walking stick that goes to a snake, and the hand that can turn leprous, and the water that can turn to blood. God says, well, I'll give you 3 of them. And that didn't impress the people in Egypt at all. I don't think miracles ever convert anybody. Miracles may draw attention to something. They never convert. The Holy Spirit converts. So if somebody says, well, I hope God gives them a sign, and maybe if God gave them a sign, Jesus says if someone came back from the dead, that's not going to do anything. They've got Moses and the prophets. Let them listen to them. That talks about God. You've got enough. And so we often say, oh, if God could just do a miracle for them, then maybe they would turn. People can often take a miracle simply like a box of cereal off a shelf. Good, I'll take it and I'm on my way further. We're going to talk about that some more later as well. But the grumbling and the griping and the complaining, at first, God is going to be gracious, not wipe everybody out, but there are going to be a good number of people who are going to die, or a bad number of people who die. So anyway, we've got the elders who all gather, and they speak as well. In chapter 12 is when Miriam and Aaron complain about Moses' Cushite wife, and we know very little more about that. His wife that he gets in Midian is not the same as the Cushite wife. And there's no more than this about it. Cush is Ethiopia. So where does he get an Ethiopian wife from? And what's her name? Why don't we even have her name? Then Miriam is struck with leprosy for a week. Chapter 13 is the big one. The spies go up to Canaan. And the point here is that as they go up there, they see that it's a wonderful land. Did they want a wonderful land? Yes. They've been saying, why can't we go back to that wonderful land of Egypt? God says, I've got a better one for you up ahead. Goody, goody, goody. So they go up there and they look around, and what do they say? We can't take that. We don't have the strength to defeat those people. So what are they saying? God is not with us. They're thinking as if God is not with them. That's the root nature of sin. It can be in the sense of God can't help me, or God doesn't want to help me, or he's busy about other things, or I don't want God around because that's uncomfortable for me. So my mom and dad used to talk about one of the pastors, a young pastor who was at the church when we were growing up. And this pastor did not, he was a kind of a character and had lots of fun. And some of his relatives, his grandkids are around here, so I won't give you his name. He's a good guy. But he would go to wedding receptions. And he would stay late. Why?
So no one would dance.
Huh?
So nobody would dance?
Yeah, he knew on purpose there was going to be a dance after he left. And so he'd stay later just to give him trouble. So, everybody acted like they're not going to dance, and there he's there just kind of, visiting on purpose, just to be irritating them. So when he leaves, then they can dance. A lot of people think of God that way. When God leaves, then I can do what I want. So there are things that I don't want to do that God would not like. So therefore, how can I get away with it? That's called sin. All right? It's sort of like if you're on a diet, then you make sure when you take those 14 cookies, nobody else is looking. Okay. So, and you can pick your game. But anyway, they come back and they've got all of this. Yes, Dale?
What was so good about milk and honey, a line of milk and honey in that day?
It's better than the desert where it was just nothing unless the manna came down. So what's the land of milk about?
Pastures,
Grass?
Got pastures.
cows.
Particularly goats, probably.
Oh,
Yeah. It's kind of an odd thing for us, but more people around the world drink goat's milk than cow's milk. Because in the mountainous regions and hilly regions of the world, there are a lot more goats than there are cows. So you probably have both of them, but more for that. So a land where you can have plenty of pasture so that you get the milk that you need from the goats for your family. And a land of honey. Two definitions of honey. We would normally think of beehives. And you've got those too. They have wild honey or wild bees that would be in crevices in rocks and things. But the date palm, the sticky substance that comes from a date, also gets called honey at times. So it would be the sweet things of the land versus bread and water. Okay, these are things that come when your land is producing very, very well. So the land of milk and honey would be the kind of things that are going to bring you great joy. A wonderful glass of milk, or a very sweet tasting date. Those kinds of things are there and in abundance. Versus what they'd have had in the wilderness for sure, and versus what they probably would have had in Egypt. It doesn't talk about the land of broccoli and cauliflower. And I imagine there was some of that there too. Nobody cauliflower or broccoli later, it was around there as well. But the Israelites out in the wilderness will complain about all the vegetables that they used to have that they don't have anymore. So it's probably not the same as you might get in maybe Maryland or New Jersey or Pennsylvania or someplace where it's beautiful and lush, or our breadbasket of Nebraska or Kansas. But for their time, for their thinking, you might even call it the land of steak and lobster. It's something where it's the best you can get at that point. So anyway, the people look around and they say, this is a wonderful land, but how can we do it? Churches can do that. They can say, well, I know the Lord has this great ministry, but how in the world are we ever going to tell anybody the good news? I have a package, I hope I haven't told you this before, but I have a package of pumpkin seeds at home. And I don't know if I've ever told you that I'm a prophet. I'm a prophet of God. And so I can tell you how many pumpkins I am going to get from that package of pumpkin seeds next spring. I know right down to the exact amount. I'm going to get none. Because I'm not going to plant it. Christians often do that too.
Yes.
I'm not going to tell anybody about Jesus. Then you know what the result's going to be. You give witness to the fact that you're saved and redeemed by Jesus, you have no idea what's going to happen. But you do if you don't tell anybody. And sooner or later, if you're a Christian, you're going to find a way to tell someone. Sooner or later, one way or another, Christians have to say, this is what I believe. This is what I stand for. So my dad used to talk about the fact that at work they would say, Harvey, you're a chemist. How can you believe in the stuff about Jesus? He says, I don't know, it's not a problem. I believe that, and I work here in the chem lab. But, you know, we have to have proof here. You have to go parts per million on your samples. What about that? He says, I don't know, it's not a problem. But the first thing was, they knew he was a Christian. Okay, they knew he was a Christian. Now, that doesn't mean you go, beating everybody over their head with a John 3:16 sign, or shoving a Bible into everybody. Where I worked in the copper tubing plant, there was a guy who would move the big tubes around and put straps around, and he had this, what would you call it up above?
Forklift.
No,
Conveyor belt?
no, it was more,
Overhead hoist.
well, it was like a hoist, but he could move around. He could go all over. And so he's dropping leaflets down on people. Or the guys who have a bullhorn at the stadium, yelling Jesus loves you or something like that. It doesn't have to be that way. And so we look at what doesn't work or what we think is foolish and say, well, I wouldn't want to be one of them. But the Lord gives us ways, and sooner or later, people will find out who you are. It can't be helped. If you're a Christian, they'll know it, one way or another. Now, it may not be that they understand what Christian love is or forgiveness, but they'll know something's going on in you that drives you to be who you are. Well, anyway, chapter 14, then, the people want to go back to Egypt. Now, this is really interesting because they just got shown the promised land, which is more beautiful than Egypt. And they want to go back down to Egypt. I mean, the sequence of this is just really crazy. God says, I've had it with them. I got them out of jail, and now here they are back again. They want to go right back there. So this is that thing where God is slow to anger and forgives, and he's full of love. But then God says, this crowd's going to die in the wilderness. So we never get this thing where God says, oh, I know you didn't mean it, so we'll just go on as if nothing happened. There are going to be consequences on this earth for what we do, even before God. So if let's say that I drink 10 cups of coffee a day, okay, of regular coffee, then God's not gonna say, well, I'll give you a good night's sleep anyway. He's gonna let me be up all night, okay? And so, you know, you can add to that however you will, but our view is, isn't God a loving God? Do you know what we mean by that usually when people say it?
Yeah.
Can't I get away with whatever and God will still love me and not give any problem? Yes, sir.
I don't know if you watch football, but there's a commentary during the pre-game discussions, and it's called "Come On, Man." And I'm just thinking that God's up there, and we do these silly things, and He says, "Come on, man!
Yeah.
What the heck are you doing?" I like that. I like that concept. I can get along with God that way.
Yeah.
Come on, man!
What is up with you anyway? Yeah. And how are we going to find the way God says that in the Bible? We're going to find the scriptures talk about how God made us to live life. Then when you do something stupid, you know, or against Him, don't be so surprised if the consequences come upon you.
Yeah.
But a lot of times it's not that God has to send something. It's built right in, is the way the Hebrew Bible talks about it. The consequences are built right into the sin. If I drank 10 cups of caffeinated coffee today and I'm sitting up at 4 in the morning, God didn't have to send me anything.
That's right.
Okay? I brought the consequences on. And actually God's grace and mercy is that He keeps all the consequences from happening right now. That's what forgiveness is.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that there is no price to pay or whatever. It just means right now, Cain, you get the mark on your forehead. But yet there are others who are going to die right away. So you've got Cain with the mark on the forehead. You've got Dathan and Abiram who die with the unholy fire. And so the real puzzle is, how come God doesn't do the same thing with everybody all the time? Why is God gracious sometimes and sometimes less gracious?
Because that's the way He is.
Yeah, but
That's
you
why
see,
he's God. He's all powerful.
yeah, I know, but there are some people who say, hey, I don't like that kind of God. And to which we can say, tough, that's the one we have.
That's the one
You know,
we have.
that's the one who's there. You know, don't try and say, well, I'll take out the book and I'll draw a new sketch. The Almighty God is the Almighty God, and what He does, He does. Anyway, so again, to review this, the people then say, okay, well, we'll go up in the land then. And the Amalekites, who they had fought back in Exodus after they went out of Egypt, the Amalekites destroy the people who are going up around by the city of Arad, which is down around here. Let's see, is Arad, is Hebron? They don't have Arad on here, but I don't think. Oh yeah, here it is. Here's the city of Arad. So they're going to go up from somewhere in here, they're going to go up into the land. They're going to try and go this way. Eventually they're going to go around here and come up from over on the east side. That's our story of what we're going to see today. But at first they're going to go up this way, and the Amalekites come and they just wipe them out. The next chapter, 15, then they get a variety of instructions, and then this is where a man who is gathering sticks on the Sabbath day gets stoned. Why didn't they cut him a little slack? Oh, God says stone them
Yeah,
if they're doing something wrong.
yeah.
Now, why is it a problem? Let me give